Yeah, so I think one of the things that really does come to mind is what we were just talking about in terms of like just kind of establishing the relationships to really move forward with some of the corporate engagement. I think one of the facets of being in a small community is it can either be really easy if you know the right person or really difficult if you don't, just to build that relationship. So, we've made, like I said, some progress in various ways, but I think they're kind of like some big fish in the community, so to speak, that it'd be great if we could just figure out what that access point would be, whether it's a particular type of project or just a particular person that holds the keys to that gateway.
You're listening to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast. Here's your host, Stu Swineford.
Hey, Relish This podcast listeners, welcome back. Stu here. Today's episode features two really great people from San Juan Mountains Association. And they are doing some great work, actually touching over half of Colorado's wilderness forest areas with their influence and benefit. They have this really great organization down in the Durango area that started as a focus on the San Juan Mountains and the forests down there to help preserve and protect a lot of that area from use. They have a really cool educational program. They have an ambassador program, volunteers, donors. They're doing some really, really fantastic stuff. And today we talked a lot about ways that they can help hone that message, show up more effectively to people who know them, and expand their reach through social media, through email. There's some really good gold nuggets of information that we were able to unearth, and I think this is a fantastic episode. I'm excited to share it with you, and I hope you have a great time listening to it. Have a good one. Stephanie and David, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Doing great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for joining me on the show today. I'm really excited to learn a lot more about your organization and what you guys are doing there at San Juan Mountain Association. So I know you were both you're both in the Durango area. Is that correct?
We are, yes.
It is, yeah.
Nice. And is that where San Juan Mountain Association is headquartered, is in Durango?
Yes, our offices are based out of the Public Land Center, which is kind of the home base for the San Juan National Forest, but we have staff spread out. At this point, we have staff spread from Monte Vista over to Mancos is the furthest west, and up to Montrose. And we're currently looking for a new staff person in the town of Norwood as part of the Norwood district for the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, and Gunnison National Forests.
Oh, nice. So you're just expanding. That's fantastic. I was fortunate enough to do some work on Grizzly Peak Trailhead, I think, a few years ago with the Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado, which is over in your zone, kind of by Lake City. Yeah. And it's just a gorgeous part of the state. It's one of my favorite places to be. I grew up in Gunnison and so have been fortunate to spend a little bit of time in the San Juans down there. And it's just amazing country. And I commend you for all the work that you're doing to help preserve things. So tell us all a little bit more about what you do there at your organization and how you're helping to protect those forest lands and public spaces.
All right. And just so we can coordinate a little bit, I'll talk about two of the prongs, and then David, I will turn to you to talk about the stewardship prong. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Works for me.
just to coordinate a little bit, because I think we're both looking for visual clues. So San Juan Mountains Association really was born out of a community effort to be more involved in caring for public lands. And so a lot of that started out with the idea of conservation education and providing visitor information. So a lot of the folks who are on SGMA's staff are actually front desk folks in public land offices. We started with San Juan National Forest here in Durango. And we also have folks in Dolores and Pagosa Springs, and then we've kind of been expanding our partnerships with other forests and with the BLM as well. Another component of that is with our conservation education, and SGMA actually merged with Durango Nature Studies right before everything shut down due to COVID-19 in 2020. And that really strengthened both organizations' environmental education efforts. And so we start young. We start with preschoolers and kindergartners, through elementary, middle school, high school, believing that when we are exposed to the natural world, we learn to understand it, and from that understanding comes appreciation, and from that appreciation comes the desire to protect it. And that really kind of sums up a philosophy that carries through everything that we're doing with San Juan Mountains Association. But the area where we've really grown is in some of the stewardship efforts, and Dave, being the conservation director, can speak to that in much more detail.
Thanks, Stephanie. So SGMA started their stewardship and field conservation programs through the volunteer program, primarily through the San Juan National Forest, but also working with the BLM in the Canyon of the Ancients National Monument. And that also expanded beyond just San Juan to the Rio Grande over time. So the initial program and kind of our flagship volunteer program is our volunteer ranger program, which started as our wilderness information specialists, in which volunteers would suit up in a Forest Service uniform, and they'd go through extensive training, just learning about not only Forest Service policies, regulations, but also getting schooled in the leave no trace principles. And that's kind of the main thrust of the program, is that we're sharing and spreading a way of doing things on our public land that protects values and ensures that they're available for future generations. Beyond that, we do a handful of sort of group stewardship projects every year. So your National Public Lands Day type projects will do trail work or campsite cleanup, that sort of thing. And sort of going from there, we moved beyond the volunteer strictly programs to manage several crews. So several years back, we took on the wilderness monitoring program for the San Juan National Forest for the Wemanooch and South San Juan wildernesses. Okay. And we had a crew of 4 for a lot of years. We recently bumped it up to 6. But that crew, they do not only the wilderness monitoring, which is kind of setting the baseline for the wildernesses, but also doing trail work and public contact and all that important sort of boots on the ground work that really needs to happen if we're going to effectively monitor these spaces. Right. And then just quite recently, so this year was our first year with our Forest Ambassador program. And that's more aimed at your front country visitors. And it's very heavily focused on information, education, and establishing that land management presence at some of the busiest trails on the San Juan. So we've had about 10 ambassadors working over the course of the season, just doing that day-to-day public outreach, educating the public, and ensuring that people that visit the forest are doing a good job of visiting respectfully, having a great time, and leaving knowing how they can enjoy these spaces in a sustainable way.
Yeah, you guys have a lot on your plate. It's a whole bunch of different areas of focus there in terms of outreach and hands or tools in hands and et cetera. It must be very daunting, seeing how many more people are visiting our forests. There's just an increase in the overall impact. What are some of the biggest challenges you've been facing over the past several years in terms of being able to expand your mission, or at least keep up with the additional visitors?
So I can jump in here since I've got a few years with the organization under my belt. So I think, in terms of just rising to the challenge of helping manage the additional visitation, we've really done a lot of work just establishing new partnerships and establishing new roles within the land management agencies that we work with. And that's led to some really productive outcomes as far as, raising funds and adding additional programs that are supported by whether it's the agencies or, private interests or foundations. It's definitely been a challenge just keeping up with, the staffing and ensuring that we're keeping our sort of administrative fortitude on par with those additional staff and additional programs. And I think that's been something that, we've been working hard just to make sure that all the nuts and bolts are in place and just keeping the wheels on.
Nice. Is that mostly a revenue challenge, or are you guys seeing both? Well, I guess it all kind of comes down to that, but being able to get that message out there, has that been part of that hurdle?
It definitely is both, right? I mean, I came in as executive director May 1st, and the organization has grown so considerably. Like when I came on May 1st, we had 15 folks on payroll. By the end of May, we were approaching 40, and we peaked for the summer at 45. Now, most of those, by design, are seasonal employees, and so we will be contracting, and we are contracting now. But the idea and our efforts are to we recognize that the demand for public lands and recreation on public lands isn't expected to drop anytime soon. So how do we sustain the staffing that we've had this year and be good partners with our public land agencies? And so sustained funding is very much part of that equation. And then also the ability to clearly message what our successes have been and how big our role is currently is really a tough one to get across effectively. We all know that we all have very short attention spans these days, and so to really share with people the magnitude of impact that we've had is tough unless you really start dialing in visuals and infographics and sound bites to the point where people can really absorb the information.
Right.
For us to say we have 45 staff is pretty meaningless. For us to say we currently have partnership agreements with national forest that covers half of the state's national forest acreage. That's a pretty impressive number, right?
Yeah.
There are 11.4 million acres of national forest in Colorado, and SJMA currently has agreements with agencies covering 5.7 of those
Wow.
mountain makers. So, how do we, learning how to really frame information in a way that can make people go, wow, has been something we're working hard to do.
Well, that's certainly a challenge. I think that nonprofits and for-profit organizations alike are constantly trying to figure out how to reframe that differentiation, how to create a value proposition that resonates. And so you're certainly not alone in exploring ways to retool or expand the ways that your messaging can positively impact your ability to connect with people. A lot of the time we look at your differentiation as really a challenge of trying to get people to understand why you do what you do matters. And so from a nonprofit perspective, that can be a little bit of a head scratcher as you attempt to position yourselves in the position where the donors or the constituents become the heroes of the story. And you simply kind of take a back seat to that and help guide them to being able to see themselves in that light and position themselves as that kind of, key, hero in what's going on is a real challenge. And a lot of times we try to think of it in terms of kind of a 7-second hook that really gets to the answers to 3 questions. Who is this for? How does it make their life better? And how do they get it? Now, in the nonprofit space, like I said, that becomes a little bit of a challenge because, the beneficiary isn't necessarily the donor at the end of the day, but figuring out how to frame that in a way that makes the donor or the volunteer understand where they reside in this story that you're trying to tell is, that can be super effective in how you start to craft those stories on pretty much every page of your site and everything that goes out.
Yeah, I love that. I love the phrase, how do our donors and volunteers become heroes of our story?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And it can be a challenge, but it can also be kind of a fun challenge in that it's really just telling that same story just from a slightly shifted perspective. And so, coming at things from that way where, even if you're highlighting volunteers, creating opportunities for case studies that reframe that narrative is pretty important. One of the things we see with nonprofit organizations is there's always friction in terms of people's desire to, take some sort of an action. And in the for-profit space, that's usually, buying something or signing on for a service or something like that. And in the nonprofit space, there's actually an amplification of that friction. There are multiple frictions that people bump up against as they're going through that journey. And, most of us don't wake up in the mornings thinking, well, how can I give away some of my money or some of my time today? We're much more strongly motivated by things that we get as opposed to things that we give. So really, if you can fine tune and just get that story dialed in, where it just eases that friction. It's, people are kind of taking this uphill journey in terms of wanting to participate or give away some of their hard-earned time and money. But just creating opportunities to reduce that friction all along that process is key.
Yeah, I'd love your thoughts, Stu, on kind of how we navigate and message with a lot of folks who are moving here from out of state, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is, for many, this is a silver lining to COVID, right? The ability to live where you want to live, because for many, you can work remotely. And so in an area like ours, we have seen tremendous growth. Lots of folks from out of state or other parts of the state coming here, um, simply because, as you stated, the San Juans are gorgeous, and why not live where they can easily go play? And so, messaging to some of those folks coming in to say, "Hey, you're moving here to take advantage of the things we're trying to protect." Be a partner. Would love your thoughts on that.
I think it's kind of a very clear value proposition. What most of the people that are moving here recognize that is the key motivator. So just, ensuring that there's an effective communication to clearly iterate that is, an effective and potentially very important facet of our communications.
Yeah, there's that educational component that comes into play where, people may have done things a bit differently where they came from, or they just may not understand the effects. So I'm thinking about, just off trail travel above tree line, which is a little bit of a tongue twister there. People don't understand all of those impacts when you have such a short growing season, and how just simply walking off the trail can really create a negative impact on the vegetation in those areas. And so it comes down to education, which comes down to, awareness that there's a problem. And so, that can be the first step. How are you guys doing that now? Are you, obviously all of these programs are designed to do that, but when you're covering 5 million acres of forest with several thousand trailheads, probably, right? What are some of the techniques that you've been using to get that message out there?
I'd love to say we have some really, really, really effective forest ambassadors, and they are, but they are limited to the San Juan National Forest, not Sjma or the Rio Grande. It's a challenge to be sure. Leave no trace is pretty much part of everything we do with visitor information. So we mentioned the folks at front desks of public land agencies are very well versed in leave no trace principles, recreating responsibly, and then obviously the forest ambassadors and our wilderness crews are instrumental in that. And that is a small part of what is needed, but the part that we are playing, in partnership with our federal land managers.
Yeah. It's a big challenge to get in front of so many people that are so dispersed, I think. So David,
David, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask David, can you speak more to some of the educational programs that you have put in place?
Yeah, for sure. So as mentioned, the main thrust is kind of the outreach by our staff, our ambassadors, our wilderness crew, and then our volunteers. And we try to make sure that each of those receives pretty regular training and updates as far as messaging, and the main gist of it is we really like just to get our staff and volunteers in a room so that we can just practice and become more and more familiar with the messaging that we're trying to convey. And we do focus those efforts pretty heavily on the best bang for your buck areas. So I think everybody who's ever been to the San Juans is aware of Ice Lake and the Chicago Basin and the 14ers down there. So we put a lot of emphasis on those couple zones. And while COVID has kind of put a brief damper on it, what we really like doing is setting up a little base camp where we can base both our staff and volunteers kind of right in the meat of it. So right in Chicago Basin at the base of the 314ers, and then right at the base of the Ice Lakes trailhead is kind of our two primary spots that we like to put the heaviest emphasis on our outreach and education. And what we like to do is, a big part of it is always getting our volunteers and staff comfortable enough with the messaging that, regardless of who comes at them, they're going to be comfortable engaging in that conversation. And to do that, we try to make sure they get plenty of face time with agency partners who, we think they're definitely the best source in a lot of ways for getting our educational messaging nice and tight. But also, just empowering them with things like we teach them all how to do trail work so that they can grab a tool and head out and, in the uniforms. And that gets people chatting with them like really easily. Everybody wants to talk to the person that's out, clearing a drain or building a little, little rock stair, because those are the people that like, it's just so easy to open up with. So that's always kind of been my, first choice when it comes to how are we going to create an easy setting for which people to engage with our staff and get that educational message out.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, one of the things I love about your site is that it does have just information about some of these places. So, for example, if somebody's looking to do, some like maybe they want to go on the Alpine Loop or something, there's information there about that adventure. And so there's a good opportunity for your site to show up in terms of being available as a resource for people to just get, trip planning information. And then on top of that, there's obviously the impact and stewardship component. I'm wondering if there might be ways to, one of the things that a lot of nonprofits kind of have a little bit of a challenge with is just asking for people to help out with some things that are a little less traditional. So, volunteering or donating, those tend to be things that nonprofits and their teams get pretty familiar with being able to ask. But even just sharing a tip or a message or a piece of information that would help get to a different audience. One of the things that social media has done is it allows us to be pretty well connected, but it has created a situation where we're actually starting to get more boxed into our own little groups. The social media channels tend to show you information that is aligned with other information that you've liked or shared or have even read. And, I'm just kind of thinking about out of state people, they may just never even get this kind of information put in front of them. And there might be an opportunity to create an ask, like, create little business cards or little tips that people could share on their own social media accounts to kind of get that stewardship stuff out into a different audience than it might normally be shared with. That might be an additional ask that you make of your volunteers and ambassadors and everybody else.
That's a great idea. Yeah, definitely. So,
yeah, and actually that it's kind of a familiar concept. I know when I worked at Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado, as you mentioned earlier, back in 2015, and that year they kicked off an app. I think it was Stepping Up Stewardship app or something along those lines. But part of it was sharing. So that's definitely a good way just to amplify the message and potentially hit some audience that we wouldn't otherwise get in front of.
Yeah, my business actually built that site, the Stepping Up Stewardship site for VOC.
Oh, no kidding.
Back in the day, yeah. And it is more tooled toward other trail building organizations. So they're trying to share their volunteer coordination and trail building intellectual protocol with other trail building organizations. I think there was also kind of a phone app that the VOC had that
Mm-hmm.
was more tips and things like that. I know Leave No Trace does a pretty good job of this with some of the cards that they hand out, that you can, carry with you or put on your backpack with a little carabiner or something like that just give out those tips. Any of those things that people can feel like it would be interesting or cool to share that they could get along the way. Like having your ambassadors offer to take pictures with people, if they'll share it on social media or something like that, just little things like that get that message out there, particularly to a more diverse group, would be some of the things that I think would be really beneficial.
Mm.
Yeah, those are great tips. So we, in addition to popular hiking trails, we've had a couple of ambassadors stationed along the Alpine Loop,
Mm-hmm.
which, if you're familiar, is a popular OHV system that goes from Silverton or just north of Silverton, Animas Forks, over to Lake City and back around, and is very, very popular, has become incredibly busy with
Yeah.
UHVers. And in fact, people using Waze or Google routing or something, we'll often see backups. Not anywhere else on our highways, just on that Alpine Loop, which makes me wonder how fun that can be sitting in traffic, but that's okay.
Sure.
It's still beautiful.
Yeah.
But our Alpine Loop ambassadors have just done a phenomenal job interacting with and reaching out and connecting with a lot of these OHVers, which are frequently from other states and
Mm-hmm.
due to backcountry use, basically, and it's been phenomenally successful, and we're really proud of them.
Yeah, it's great to see some signage. I come over Cottonwood Pass on occasion when I go over to Gunnison, and there's some good signage there just about staying on the trail, and they've done a good job of creating OHV byways, and I know that's a big in Silverton for sure, and so yeah, just figuring out ways to not only get those people more educated about the impacts and how to keep these areas pristine and still enjoy them, but also get them to share that information. That's the piece that I think would be really interesting. Yeah, it's just a matter of figuring out what some of those kind of shareable tidbits would be, and then just ask, see if people will kind of help spread that message out to their to their networks when they when maybe they go back to Texas or wherever they may have come up from.
Yeah, definitely. And for the most part, I think they've been receptive to that. You're going to find exceptions to every rule.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I think they have done a really good job of absorbing the Stay the Trail message, the Leave No Trace message, sharing that with peers. But yeah, there's definitely room for improvement because, we need to protect these places for generations to come.
Absolutely. Where does most of your revenue come from? Is it, I know that you've also done a really good job of diversifying that in terms of being able to purchase maps and things like that through your site. But is it mostly grants? Is it still donations? Where's the bulk of your revenue come from?
The bulk of it is from the agreements we have with our federal partners.
Okay.
So just for complete transparency, and then the next section, next largest piece of the pie would be from grants and our retail outlets. So in addition to providing visitor information, we're also able, as you alluded to sell maps and guidebooks at each of the public land outlets where we operate. So there are 14 of those throughout the Rio Grande, Sjma, and San Juan National Forests. So that that helps. And then donations and memberships still comprise the smallest piece of our pie, but we're working hard to expand that piece. So,
gotcha. That I mean, like I said, the diversification piece is something that we see a lot of organizations either be nervous about adding or just be anxious about how to even do that. So it's really great to see that you've expanded a retail component, and that's kind of blown out, not just from the website, but you do have opportunities for kind of, brick and mortar sales as well. In terms of the federal component, which you said is probably one of the bigger revenue drivers for you, are those kind of guaranteed funds? Do you have to fight for them every year? How are those structured?
Little bit of both. The nice thing is we enter into 5-year agreements.
Okay.
So that's nice to know, hey, we're with each other for at least 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of that is, yes, with anybody dealing with any government budget, nothing is guaranteed, right? So
right.
We are constantly seeing what they have to allocate in our direction. So there's tremendous variability in what we actually receive from those agreements. And, fortunately, they've been strong supporters, and we've done fine. We would love to have a foundation through, let's just toss out the E word, through an endowment that helps stabilize those fluctuations so we can plan from year to year. I mean, we're finishing up 2021. We've had, Dave, feel free to correct me, but somewhere between 20 and 25, depending on who's working part-time and who, stepped away for a while, forest ambassadors and wilderness crew out in the field at any given time. We're not sure we can have that number next year. And it would be nice to have some certainty from year to year as to how many folks we know we can have as land stewards out on the forest.
Right. What are you doing so that's basically just due to the fluctuation in federal money, grant money, donations coming in, et cetera.
Yeah. Definitely.
Gotcha. Well, I know that there are, some fairly large landowners down in your neck of the woods. Do you have a program in place to try to engage with or get in touch with those people? I'm thinking, isn't it Ralph Lauren or somebody has a big chunk of land in between like Ridgeway and, not really Telluride, but the road that goes over to Telluride?
Yeah, quite the spread over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely people who have some resources that we would love to tap into, and let's just say we are working on a plan. Isn't that the eternal nonprofit management message, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the growth that we have experienced over the past 2 years really puts us in a position where a lot of this is even conceivable. And so much has changed over the past 2 years, right? So trying to figure out how to message, and you've put forth a number of great ideas and suggestions, how to message and just broaden the support for what we're trying to do is very much a part of our work right now.
Yeah, as everybody is trying to crack that nut, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it feels like, from what I'm seeing, you're laying some pretty good groundwork here online. It looks like you're active on Facebook and Instagram as well. So that's, those are two social channels that tend to get quite a bit of traction. I'm not sure where else, unless you want to start playing in trying to capture, youth opportunities, at which point you might want to look into some of the more up and coming social media platforms like TikTok or something like that. However, that is mostly going to be, one of those where they're going to recommend up in terms of either desiring to go to these types of places and then asking their parents to take them there, or something of that nature. So, it feels like you're probably playing in two of the right, ponds, for lack of a better word, in terms of social. What are you doing with your email campaigns or your email programs? Do you have a pretty robust email list at this point of past donors, volunteers, interested people?
We do. Right now, our electronic news has just well, honestly, now that I think about the numbers and then the number of people living in this area, I think there's plenty of room for growth. Our email subscription list is about 3,600 folks at this point.
Okay.
The struggle I have, and I'd love your thoughts on this too, Stu, is we're all bombarded with so many electronic newsletters, right? And so especially, we got to a point at one point this summer where our e-news was 14 pages long, and it was no. I mean, yes, we're doing a lot, but we have to have it more concise. And this is where I think my biggest struggle is. I think Facebook and Instagram were doing a pretty good job of messaging, but the e-news, so that it comes to everybody's inbox, they want to see it, they want to scan it, how we get them to absorb it, I think is a struggle I wrestle with constantly.
Well, there's certainly a few things that we've seen work relatively well with email, and I think having I don't know exactly how engaged those 3,600 people are, but that's certainly a big enough list to really make some things happen. So a few things about email. The first thing is, one of the reasons we are still really excited about email is that boomers tend to use email quite a bit, and boomers continue to be kind of the largest donor base that's out there. That generation, as they're starting to get older, they want to create opportunities to do some good with some of the money that they may have available. So they tend to be a pretty good donor resource, which is why email is still a very viable engagement tool. Now, a 14-page newsletter you've identified is not probably ideal. I think sending out something giant and robust like that every once in a while isn't a bad plan. I would certainly test it if you have that much material. I'd put it out there and see what happens. Just look at your click rates, look at your open rates, et cetera. Yeah. But one of the things that we've been both doing internally and recommending for our nonprofit partners is to really consider all of your interaction as very value-based, and attempting to provide information that's not just solicitative, if that's a word, solicit. Yeah. You're not just asking for things all the time, but is providing real tangible value. So these could be, everything from, how to camp effectively in bear country, things to do and look for that are, perhaps a little bit off of the beaten path in terms of, side trips off of the Alpine Loop, if that's an option, places to stay, or places to get lunch while you're on your tour, things that are value adds that aren't just about, kind of nagging people to stay on the trail and pick up their trash and do all those things that we want them to do. And then also really narrowing down those emails to a single value add. So instead of sending out one 14-page email, how can we get, maybe 10 smaller emails out of that? And so that there's a very specific thing going on in that email that somebody can learn or share or pass on, because it's even kind of hard to share a newsletter if there's some specific part of it that you want somebody to dive into. It's hard for people to share that because it's embedded in this larger format. And then the other thing that I would consider is segmenting your list and seeing, asking people what they're interested in. Are you interested in camping tips, or, volunteer information, or, other items that might be in that 14-pager. And then just send, more specific emails to those people based upon their identified interests.
That's a great idea. And we definitely have been looking to do that. And hopefully now that we're coming off a pretty intense summer season, we'll be moving more towards that. But that's a good reminder that we need to head that direction, and definitely like the idea of value-based messaging. I think we could, I can see a lot of ways to go with that. So
yeah,
Dave, that's got your brain spinning too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's definitely some good potential to have kind of breakaway e-newses, because now we are just growing as an organization to kind of several different elements. And, I've heard from volunteers myself that, there's certain things that they're really into and certain things that they're just kind of lukewarm on. And I think we could have higher engagement by providing that content that really keeps them hooked. Right.
Yeah, it's really all about delivering value, and whether that value is that your organization helps protect, these open spaces and natural spaces that we all love so much, or the value of explaining to people how to build a drain in a trail or something like that. I mean, not everyone would need to know that necessarily, but if you had that message sent to the right audience, you'd certainly position yourselves well in terms of staying top of mind when they're out looking for an organization to engage with. I would look at, you would probably have your volunteer segment, you would have your donor segment. Obviously you want to ask everybody every once in a while if there's a volunteer project coming up, if they'd be interested in coming out and supporting that. And if they can't come out, if they'd be willing to donate, some funds to help buy everyone lunch or something like that. If you can frame it in terms of how these efforts are tangibly used to benefit the San Juans and beyond, that's where people will get really excited about it. It's not just, I'm donating to this organization, I don't know exactly what that is going to accomplish. It's kind of like when organizations say, it takes, $1 a day to feed, feed and buy books for a student in this zone. There's a very tangible outcome to that support. And so figuring out ways to kind of message that can be super helpful. David, do you have problems reaching out to new volunteers? Do most of your projects fill up? How is that part of your program working?
I think in general we have really good volunteer engagement, and we've done a fairly good job, both of establishing a volunteer base and putting ourselves out in the community in ways that can attract new volunteers as well. Mm-hmm. I think in particular, I've definitely noticed an uptick in just volunteer interest in the last couple of years as we have done a pretty concerted effort of expanding our like online efforts, whether that's social media platforms, e-news, and just like being really consistent with it. That's definitely drawn a lot of interest. And then, just by having folks in the field, especially,
right,
having those ambassadors out there, they're constantly referring new volunteers to us. So I guess you really can't put a value on just like good quality human interaction.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing. I am on the board of a trail building organization over here in the Netherlands area. And when we're out building, people stop and ask us questions and thank us. And it's certainly a really huge opportunity to get them more involved by offering to, let them know when our next trail building day is. Because I think most people who use the outdoors really do feel like there's an opportunity there to give back, and they may not be doing it. So there's kind of this sense of guilt that pops up. But fortunately, there's ways to alleviate that guilt just by volunteering a little bit.
Absolutely.
So, just letting people know how rewarding it is to hike on a trail that you may have built a little section of, and even if it's just a small section, I'm wondering if there aren't opportunities to get out into the kind of the local hotels and restaurants and even ski areas. I know both. You have a couple pretty amazing ski areas down in that zone with Silverton and Wolf Creek and oh geez, I'm forgetting the one that's right there outside of Durango. Purgatory. Yeah. But I think that a lot of the ski areas are starting to want to educate their users a little bit more than they perhaps have in the past, particularly with climate change. And so just being able to give somebody something to do, if they're visiting Purgatory in the winter to go ski, and want to, and are planning to come back in the summer, just putting that bug in their ear that they might be able to, to donate half a day to building some trail or picking up some trash or doing something that just gives back a little bit, might be another opportunity to get in front of some of these people.
Yeah, those service vacations can do wonders, right? Another area there that we've had success, and I think also opportunity to do even more, is workplace projects. So inviting a corporation or business to do some employee bonding through a service project. David's had some good examples of success stories there, which we'd like to capitalize on further.
Yeah, for sure. I know that you probably have a lot of experience from your time at VOC with that. I know that they have big corporate days and will put together in big at least decent sized parts of projects that some of these local corporations will come out and put people on. Yeah,
definitely. That was definitely a really big part of the programming at VOC, and it's something that I'd really like to add here. We've done a bit of engagement with the local business community, and it's been really nice for kind of building some relationships, and it's obviously helpful for the fundraising side of things as well, just having those relationships in place. But I think there's tons of room for growth as far as the corporate engagement.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there might be an opportunity to do roundups with some of the ski areas, or or dedicating some volunteer time for your on your pass as you're buying a pass. They're just all sorts of creative ways to try to get people to feel like they have an opportunity to give something back. And it doesn't have to just be time. And obviously it's great to spend some time outdoors working in nature and doing those types of things. But some people have a little bit more money than they have time. And so just giving them options is something that can be really key, in terms of just getting engagement and getting people involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love those ideas. So,
well, are there any other things that you've considered that you tried that didn't work quite as well as you would like, or you've been thinking about but don't know exactly how to pull the trigger on?
well, I'm gonna toss that one to David, see if he has anything, because 4 months into my tenure, still a lot of things ahead on my to-do list, and not I've tried this. Let's regroup and figure out Plan B. So,
Sure.
David, how would you handle that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really does come to mind is what we were just talking about, in terms of like just kind of establishing the relationships to really move forward with some of the corporate engagement. I think one of the facets of being in a small community is it can either be really easy if you know the right person, or really difficult if you don't.
Right.
Just to build that relationship. So, we've made, like I said, some progress in various ways, but I think they're kind of like some big fish in the community, so to speak, that would be great if we could just figure out what that access point would be, whether it's a particular type of project or just a particular person that holds the keys to that gateway.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, if you look at some of those, I'm going to go back to the rounding up opportunity, that doesn't actually cost the organization much. There's probably a little bit of accounting work and then a little bit of training in terms of getting their people to start asking for that. But at the end of the day, they don't necessarily have to match anything or do any sort of donation themselves. They're merely asking people if they want to, round up to the nearest dollar, or even just tack on a donation. If you just give them a line item in their system that is do you want to donate $5 to, to your organization, to the SJMA, that creates an opportunity for awareness as well as revenue. So those are some of the things that can be really effective. We, Nederland Area Trails Organization, recently was one of our local breweries is called Busey Brews, and they had a brew for the whole month of June, and I think $1 for every one that was purchased was given back to NATO. Now, certainly they were putting in on that, but they also had instruct their staff. Every month they have a different kind of recipient, and they instructed their staff to ask if people wanted to round up or make a small donation to our organization during the month of June. And, it generated revenue, and it generated a nice little chunk. And I know that our local Ace Hardware also does roundup days or they round up, they give you the opportunity to round up, year round. And, they'll pick a different organization from time to time to be the recipient of that. And basically every transaction that comes through there, it's, at most 99 cents and at least a penny. If you figure out how many transactions go through, and, you figure that average is 50 cents, there's, 50 cents on every transaction can start to add up.
It really does. Yeah. Our local Ace Hardware does the same thing. And I'm writing notes, and David and I'll regroup after this for sure to implement some of these great ideas.
Well, that'd be great. I can't believe it's been an hour already. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm, very excited to see what happens next, or what comes next for you guys. I think that you have you're doing a lot of great work down there in a huge swath of land that I don't get down to as much as I would like to, but I certainly come to Silverton once a year and travel through that zone as much as I can. How can people find out more about the SJMA?
Easiest way is through our website, which is simply sjma.org. Obviously, we've got a Facebook presence and Instagram presence, and I think both of those, if you just search San Juan Mountains Association, should pop up pretty readily. Let's see, what else am I missing, David?
I would say those are going to be the easiest three, and we are pretty good about updating all three of them. If you're feeling particularly excited about the cause, it's really easy to hop on our e-news. If you just scroll to the bottom of our webpage, there's a spot there where you can sign up. And I think other than that, we also do a monthly column in the Durango Herald if you're just kind of looking for some highlights. And that's just called the Stewards of Land column.
Well, I would also encourage people to just make sure that they're looking for your ambassadors and volunteers out on the trailhead during the summer months while they're down exploring the beautiful mountains in the San Juans.
Most definitely.
So I love having these conversations, but I also really like to spur action and trying to get people to actually do something after listening to our show today. If there was anything that you, Stephanie, or David would want people to do after listening today, what would that be?
Well, we can throw in a little plug here. We've got an upcoming National Public Lands Day event in conjunction with the BLM office over on the Dolores River. And you can find details for that on our website.
And since it is National Public Lands Day, and hopefully many of your listeners are spread across the nation, figure out how to get involved in your own backyard to, just protect public lands or some of your favorite places. We all know it does take many, many hands to take care of even the wild places. So just get involved wherever you may be. And certainly if you're in our neck of the woods, we'd love to have you volunteer or be a member or otherwise engage with us.
Well, I really appreciate both those ideas. I think that the more that we can get people out and about enjoying our public lands and then giving a little bit back to them, the better off we're all going to be. Thank you guys both so very much for being on the show today. I had a blast talking with you and learning more about San Juan's Mountain Association.
Thanks for the opportunity.
It's been really great chatting.
Yeah, have a great day. All right, there you have it. Another great episode of Relish This. Thanks for listening. If you would like to learn more about how to apply the audience engagement cycle to expand your organization's mission, there are two things you can do. Right now, you can go to missionuncomfortablebook.com to download a copy of my book. And while you're there, you can get your purpose-driven marketing score to see where you can unearth some gold for your organization. If you'd like to listen to back episodes of the show or sign up to be a guest, go to relishstudio.com/podcast. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week for another great episode of Relish This.